So I began to be involved with Outward Bound in the 1980s when I was a young entrepreneur starting a magazine publishing company in Camden. And Outward Bound was headquartered in Camden and Rockland. And my cohort group included lots of people from Outward Bound. So from the very beginning of my professional career, in one way or another, the teamwork skills, the leadership skills that are so important in the always evolving philosophy of Outward Bound have been part of my own personal toolkit for my career. And over 40 plus years, I've been an entrepreneur. And most recently, before retiring a year or so ago, I was the CEO and chairman of Forbes Media. I was the first non-family member to run Forbes and helped execute the plan to evolve that long established and successful print business into the digital powerhouse and innovator and technology company that it is today. Along the way, I've worked as a CEO in the technology space at Ziff Davis, in consumer publishing with Condé Nast, and a whole list of involvements that over 40 years of work isn't a lot of businesses, but if I elaborate on all the different places I've been, it makes me feel like I can't hold a job and that I've been moving around all the time. But the most important element of my being here this morning is an ongoing and very real appreciation for everything that Outward Bound can do in a professional setting. And I want to, before we dive into the topic of crew, not passengers, unlocking leadership potential, I want to introduce to the larger group the panel that will talk about this subject and some other things a little later in our process. And that group includes Brittany Charette, who's a manager in leadership and organizational development executive at WEX. Brittany is the designer and strategic leader of WEX's leadership development portfolio, which serves everyone in that organization, from emerging leaders to senior vice president. She leads teams across the organization to create an environment where leaders can do their absolute best work. Jan Kirsch, who's a senior leader and leadership education executive at Maine Development Foundation. Jan is a change leader, strategic partner, facilitator, and coach who brings a deep passion and experience to her work. In her role at MDF, she directs the organization's two flagship leadership development programs, Leadership Maine and the Institute for Civic Leadership. Catherine Lamson is Senior Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer at the MEMIC Group. Catherine is responsible for the corporate administrative functions of the MEMIC Group, including human resources, employee compensation and benefits, and training and education. She's also a graduate of MDF's Institute for Civic Leadership. Greg Sauder is president of WGI. Through his role as president of WGI, Greg is focused on advancing the company's commitment to innovation, digitization, expanding its markets, and driving sustainable growth. He's an advocate for WGI associates with powerful ideas on how to best help meet the needs of 21st century communities and their growing populations. So with that as a backdrop, the way we're going to operate this morning, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, is I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes relating some experiences I've had with Outward Bound and prompting leadership. And then we're going to break into groups to talk about a short assignment, which I'll give to you. And then we're going to come back and the panel will convene and talk about that assignment. So a little different than the way things are ordinarily done. We want to get everybody involved as quickly as possible. So we'll break into these groups, which I'll let someone else on the line describe from a technology standpoint in just a few minutes, and then come back and talk about what the panel has to say about all those things. Have I got that right, Andrew?
Sounds good to me, Mike.
That's an interesting answer, different from have I got it right, but I'll take it.
Yes, you have it right. Spot on.
Every time I think about the subject of crew, not passengers, and I'll make this personal in terms of my experience. I always remind myself that we so often think of Outward Bound as we've often got an image in our brains that comes from whatever our direct experience has been. And a lot of us think of it as teenagers from different backgrounds, sort of coming of age and shedding the civilization that they're leaving and going out in the woods or on the water to find out what they're made of. And there's no question that that's a really important part of what Outward Bound is. But Outward Bound's roots, and it's part of the diversity that Outward Bound enjoys today, go back to really a professional bias. Outward Bound started in wartime in Great Britain, when there was a very strong feeling that young men in those days in particular, and executives and leaders were soft and didn't have the skills necessary to survive under conditions that they weren't at all used to. And Outward Bound was a tool that was developed sometimes in secondary schools, but in the workplace, to help provide frankly survival skills and leadership prompts that were appropriate to the times that people were living in. And I think that that's true, as true today as it was at the beginning of Outward Bound's amazing history. And one of the exciting things that I've had the opportunity to do falls very much into that category. Nothing as dramatic as wartime and trading briefcases for rifles, but the tools that Outward Bound can provide to professionals are very real. And one of the ongoing experiences that I've had with Outward Bound was to create, as I think back on it, this sounds sort of self-serving because, well, I'll tell you what it is first, and then you determine whether it was self-serving or not. But I had the opportunity to pull invitational groups together from my industry, from the media industry, take publishers and business executives and editors and content producers out on Outward Bound trips. And I was able to with a partner, invite people from throughout my own industry on really exciting and adventurous trips to lots of different places around the world. So the idea was get editors and publishers in the print business, let's say, out on an Outward Bound trip, show them what Outward Bound means, what it's all about through direct experience, and hope that when they get back to their desks, they would write about Outward Bound, publish photographs, on the business side, make advertising space available for Outward Bound with a real knowledge of what they were doing and how they were doing it. And it was a wonderful mousetrap because we were able to invite these important, influential people into the Outward Bound experience, and on the other end, share the enthusiasm that they brought back and the publicity and the even monetary gain for Outward Bound that was inherent in having had a great experience out in the wilderness. And it was really fun and glamorous. We went to Nepal and we climbed Kilimanjaro, we climbed Mount Ben Nevis, we went on trips all through the United States. But the most interesting and I think pertinent for our conversation this morning element of this, and I hope it doesn't sound, I'm not going to use names, but I'll use some titles. We were able to recruit people from really, the top editorial and business roles. Let's keep it in the magazine business for time being, because that's where we started. I might be on a trip with the editor-in-chief of Time Inc. and the CEO of Ziff Davis, and an editor from Outside Magazine, a business person from the Wall Street Journal, top people in their roles back home, and leaders and bosses. And the most interesting dynamic of all of this, even though everyone understood intellectually they were going on an outdoor leadership adventure, was to watch people who, in their day-to-day lives and in their jobs, were the boss. They were indisputably, in most cases, the person, quote unquote, in charge. And to look at a group of a dozen people separated from all the pomp and circumstance of their roles, put their equipment together and head out into the woods, and watch them have to drop their I'm in charge position to kind of disconnect the boss from what they were going to need to do on the mountain or out on the water. And it was fascinating to watch. And I wish I'd done a better job of writing about or chronicling photographically how people looked and how they felt on day one of the experience, and at the end of a week or 10 days, how they felt and behaved differently. But watching the absolutely necessary to the success of the trip, not just did everybody have a good time, but we were able to get where we needed to go and accomplish what we needed to do, required all of these alphas to drop being in charge and telling everybody what to do, and pick up a paddle or pick up a pack and make a fire or cook a meal. It was fascinating to watch a little bit of cynicism and resistance, which quickly dropped and was replaced by, what can I do? How can I do more than everybody else? How can I be the best possible crew out there? To when it found its own level, and this group of people who, in a few days would be back at the Four Seasons Grill Room in New York, greeted by the maitre d', but watch them evolve into key members of a crew, of a team that was working to accomplish a set of shared goals. And you'd go from resistance to over excitement and over doing it, to finding its right level, to at the end of a trip, invariably, and I can't think of when it wasn't the case, a really smoothly operating group of people who were a crew, who were a team, who were working together to accomplish goals that there's no way any one of them could have accomplished on their own. And the lessons from that are so abundant, and may seem like they could be obvious, but questions like when they'd go back to the office, am I going to be a guy who coaches and issues orders from the sidelines, or am I going to be more of a player coach? Am I going to get in the game and really be a member of the team? Am I going to try to play all the instruments in the orchestra, or am I going to be a better conductor and know what people need to do and how I can lead them to a greater return and a greater result? So it was this amazing timeline and continuum of crew, not passenger, that we're here to play a role, and it's critically important, and teamwork is what really makes things happen. And the lessons of that for how you go back and manage as a leader within your own organization, as I said before, were just bountiful and very, very rewarding. So pardon me for making, telling that personal story, and I hope it doesn't sound like I was trying to, brag on these fancy people who went on these trips, because it's actually the opposite that was the truth on the other end of these, engagements.
So you're saying you're passionate about this, Mike? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and I have been since I was 25 years old. And yesterday, as a way to move on, I launched my boat in Rockland and had a little bit of a disaster, which I won't detail, although at another time it'd be fun. But it resulted in my boat almost sinking in Camden Harbor. And what I had to do, but more importantly, what people around me did to help, no one's life was in danger, although the water was really very, very cold. So nothing's safe. But what people around me did, what my reaction was to taking help and to dealing with a difficult situation, it just seized me that teamwork and knowing, when to be in charge and when to let others carry the ball is really, 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 really important. So with that said, I'm going to try to take us to the next spot, and maybe this gives that story and its application to things you encounter in your own organizations and the other organizations that you work with. Take us to the next stage of the agenda, which is, I believe, for us to break into groups and to talk about a specific subject that I'll share with you in a moment. Again, Andrew, am I in the right spot?
You are. Carry on.
Well, and I'll try to, I'll ask you to think about this in the context of your own sensibility as it relates to Outward Bound, not just the little story that I just told you about mine, but what does that prompt you when you think about the often used term, true leaders are born? And I'm going to let that hang there and give it to you as you go into your groups, as opposed to trying to adapt it or color your sense of what we want you to think about when you talk about the idea that true leaders are born. I'm going to turn it back to you, Andrew, or Kim, to describe to people how they should break into groups.
That's perfect, Mike. Thank you. I neglected at the outset to introduce Kim Ratner and Nina Shepperson, who are on the line as well. And Nina and Kim and I are all distinguishable by the blue backdrop and the little Hurricane Island Outward Bound School logo at the top. Nina is Chief Breakout Officer today. Nina, how are we looking on those breakout rooms?
Pretty good. Ready when you are.
I say let's do it. I think we've allotted you 8 minutes, although many Zoom users might know there's going to be a little bit of bonus transition time at the end. But presume that you've got 8 minutes and think deeply and chat deeply about Mike's recollection of this old adage that leaders are born. And we'd love to hear your thoughts when you come back as well. So enjoy the conversation. Well, thanks, everybody. Good to see everyone coming back. I hope those conversations were fruitful and entertaining. I really, if nothing else, wanted you to feel as if you were in a community today and to know that you're in this space with a lot of really bright people with a lot of great ideas and positive spirits. And also just to prime the pump a little bit for what questions and opinions you might like to share. So with that in mind, if you could each make use of the snazzy chat feature and share a word or a sentence or whatever moves you, a haiku if you want, that captures maybe the most interesting idea or essence of that conversation you just had, and maybe you could share it with the rest of us, if you would. And while you're doing that, hopefully we stick with the conversation, but I know you'll have one eyeball on the chat, which is great. And I actually have asked the panelists to feel welcome to keep an eyeball on the chat. And if they see something that they'd like to hear a little more about, brace yourself, because you might actually, your name might appear if they're so moved. So be prepared. With that said, though, I'm going to prompt in the panelists finally. Here we are a half hour in, and you haven't gotten to meet Catherine and Greg and Brittany and Jan. So just because they're in this order on my Zoom screen, Catherine, I'm going to start with you. And I'm going to say you've got no more than 3 minutes to tell us your leadership journey, however you want to interpret that.
Thanks, Andrew. When I think about leadership, I think about being a teenager and being an oldest child and probably the leader of the pack. Good, better, and different, I was the leader of the pack. But I think that as a young girl, I lost my edge. I lost my confidence. And instead of raising my hand, would sit quietly and watch as others moved forward while I stayed in the middle of the pack in a safety zone. And so going to work, I worked really hard. And it became apparent to me that those that were around me that would step forward, raise their hand, and move forward were going to get ahead faster than I would have had I stayed in the middle of the pack. So I think that, when you talked about true leaders are born, I do think there's something to that. I think that you are born with some of those skills, but I think those skills need to be massaged, so to speak. And I think you need to experiment a little bit. I think you need to take a risk. And not a risk where you're going to lose your life, of course, but a little bit of risk to put yourself out and be vulnerable. And so I had to learn how to do that. I have spent the majority of my working career in an environment that was surrounded by men. And so to be the only woman was a little odd. And I had to really learn how to maneuver in that space. They're incredibly competitive, bold, usually ahead or more taller than me. So, size-wise, you're even smaller. And so I had to learn how to do that. I think that some of my work gave me an opportunity to come forward with new ideas and so forth. And frankly, this is a shameless plug, but I had the opportunity to do a Maine Development Foundation program. We had an Outward Bound experience, and I realized very quickly when I was in the group, and I was the only woman in some of these particular, not in the MDF, but in some Outward Bound leadership programs, I realized that I was the leader. And I understood what we were supposed to do. I understood the mission. I understood how to get from point A to point B. And it was really an affirming experience. So I think that, leaders, sometimes we really need to put ourselves out a little bit when we are feeling uncomfortable. And I look at it now, when you're a leader, our job is to open the door and make sure that others have the opportunity to come through. And so I am a door holder now, making sure that others have the opportunity to experience all of those things.
Catherine, you just set the bar high. If I were Greg, I'd be terrified to have to share after that, honestly. But Greg, I'll take the pressure off you by going straight to Jan here, because sorry, Jan, but Catherine mentioned that she is an alumnus of one of the very programs that you still steward to this day, and that kind of sort of feels like a segue to me. So Jan, can you share similarly?
Well, I don't know if I can repeat Catherine's story, that's for sure. But good to see you all here. Yes, I do lead Leadership Maine and ICL, but it's been a long journey to get there. As I think about my own leadership journey, it did start many years ago when I first went to work in the world of manufacturing, and one of my managers saw something in me that perhaps I didn't see in myself at the time. And I started a job to make money out of college, which some of you may have done. And 9 months later, I was promoted and doubled my salary to do a job that forced me to get out and meet people in the manufacturing facility, to really understand who was working there and what were they doing in the inside out of their jobs. And that's the point in time when I started thinking about, well, what does it really take to lead? What does it take to lead in organizations like this? And should we be making assumptions that the only leaders are the people who are sitting in the CEO office? And I very quickly came to understand that if that's the way I believed, if that's the way I functioned, we would not be successful as an organization as we move forward with ideas like self-directed work teams and how to improve efficiencies and save money and all those things. CEO can't do it alone. The person who reports to the CEO can't do it. You have to engage people and I'll help them to step up as leaders in ways that people never imagined they could. And in our programs, we don't talk about leadership as a title. We talk about it as a moment. It may be a moment in time where you step up to lead, even though you don't have the title to do so. And my journey as a leader from the time that I stepped out of college has reinforced that over and over again as I met people and worked with people who did not or were not recognized as leaders. And yet they came up with the best ideas, made the best improvements. And really, I found out that my job was to create a container for people to succeed. How do we set it up so people can be successful? Not only in what they pull out of themselves, but in how we create that container in our organizations and in our communities for people to say, oh yeah, I can do this work. I can do something, I can make a difference. And so even, for me, I had to come to my point in time where I thought, well, how can I make more of a difference? I worked in manufacturing for 20 years, left as a VP of HR for a division, national division of the company, and had gone through some pretty difficult moments with cancer and my family and cancer of my own, and said, okay, how do I use everything I've learned to step up to an even bigger leadership role? Not necessarily a bigger company, but a bigger leadership role. And that's how I ended up at Outward Bound for about 10 years. It's how I ended up at the Institute for Civic Leadership at MDF. I kept thinking about how do I make a bigger difference, but it wasn't about title. It was about how do I bring more people in to work as effectively as they can, as they step up to leadership in their organizations and in their communities. I'm not quitting that journey anytime soon. Looking forward to continuing to do that. We have over 2,000 alums right now as we think about ICL and Leadership Maine, and I don't know why we can't double that in the next couple of years. Maybe that's a little fast, but anyway, I'll stop there. That's probably my 3 minutes.
Jan, that was terrific. Thank you. And for those of you who aren't from Maine, and that's many of you, you may be interested to know that there are a few thousand alumni in the state who have participated in Leadership Maine and ICL, and you'd be hard pressed to walk in an organization of any moderate to larger size without finding alumni. And the commonality amongst them is that they all wish they could grow up to be Jan Kearse, I think. So
no, the commonality amongst them is they all talk about their Outward Bound experience after the program.
Well, thank you,
Nothing
Jan.
off that log. But anyway, go ahead.
So, hey, Brittany, I'm gonna pick on you next here. And for those of you who don't know Brittany, which is probably most of you, I'll tell you, Brittany has sort of a unique lens within this panelist, in that not only is she designing and facilitating these programs, but as I said to her yesterday, she's classically trained as a psychologist and an organizational psychologist. And so I think she brings just a different and very high quality viewpoint here on the topic. So Brittany, now that I've just set the bar high for you, what would you like to share with us? No pressure.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so as Andrew said, I spent many years, 11 years, in fact, studying to be a psychologist. And so I actually moved down from Northern Maine, which I am actually sort of returning to now. So it's been a journey. So I was in Southern Maine for over 10 years. And so I, was trained in behavioral science, and I did a short stint in Portland, Maine at USM in clinical mental health counseling in the master's program there. But similar to what Jan was saying, I wanted to impact more people than just the one-on-one. Like, you can have a really major impact in an individual person's life and spending, a lot of time with them and helping them individually. But it was a year into my master's program, and I thought to myself, there has to be something else for me to do. And I've always had a fascination with business and organizations as a sort of system. And so back in 2000 and probably 11, I believe, this was the field of organizational psychology, leadership psychology, believe it or not, was not as nearly as popular as it is now. I think we have an increased emphasis on, the health of an organization, right? From a cultural standpoint, more so now than ever. So over 10 years ago, I had no idea this was even a field. And so this wonderful person at UMaine Augusta introduced me to the field, and the rest is history. So I've studied leadership, and I interacted with folks at WEX. I've been at WEX for 5 years with leaders. It's not often that you get to join a company and just interact with, the executive leadership team and the senior most leaders right away. And so that was really interesting, being very brand new to my field, but very curious, mildly zealous, if you will. And so it was a really interesting experience right from the get-go for me. And I've enjoyed every single day, and that's not to say that there haven't been more difficult days, of course, but one thing I will say about the leadership sort of idea in my journey, I think one thing that if you ask anybody who's known me more than an hour, they'll tell you that Brittany is just always Brittany. You could look back at pictures of me when I was 4 years old and I was being silly, and I'm kind of still the same version of myself that I've always been, just curious, not afraid to ask questions. And really just an advocate. So I do lead a team now, but even before I led a team at WEX, I was still sort of the voice and an advocate for certain behaviors, certain habits and practices that I really didn't find enough people were talking about. And so in that way, I found myself just falling into this natural role, but we just didn't even have, when I first joined WEX, the OD team, as it was back then, the organization development team was 3 people, and now it's like 65 people, I don't know. And so I don't lead all of them. It's, we've morphed and changed, but yeah, so as the team has changed, we've had a much greater impact, and we work closely with other teams throughout HR and the diversity, equity, inclusion team. And so it's been I feel like my leadership journey has really just completely accelerated since joining WEX, but I've always found myself in a position where I was asking those questions and really just forcing people to think a little bit differently. And I think that set me up for the success that I've had at WEX.
Thank you, Brittany. That's great. Incidentally, one of the questions we got prior to the event from one of the participants asked about the issue, the relationship between morale in the workplace and psychological safety. And so maybe we ought to be coming back to you with that at some point here. So keep me honest on that. Greg, finally, how you feeling about these 3 minutes?
I don't know, Andrew. That's I wish I had gone first. Let me just say that. It's awesome. So, I guess I'll start with my perspective, which is I've been in leadership roles my whole life in one form or another, starting out as a young man in sports, and then with a shovel in my hand, leading construction crews, and then with a hammer in my hand, I started my own construction company, and then leader of a family of 5 and a dog. You know, and then growing into a C-suite leader of a global Fortune 200 architecture, engineering, and construction firm with nearly 100,000 employees. I spent time as the president and board chair of a global nonprofit, an organization called Engineers Without Borders, which I think of almost like a distant cousin to Outward Bound, given their missions. And then did some work in startups, and I founded a technology accelerator, which was helping early stage companies get on a path to commercialization. And believe it or not, it sounds like it's focused on technology, but really focused on the development of leaders. And now as president of WGI, where I'm responsible for 700 folks going through a digital transformation and significant growth and acquisitions. And through that journey, I've learned a ton, made a lot of mistakes, you know, always striving to get better. And leadership is hard. It's really hard. And the thing that's ironic about it is the things that we have to do as leaders are simple, right? But doing them well and consistently is really hard. And our decisions directly affect people's lives. And, you know, I think the hardest part of it too is the people part. And there's a lot of responsibility because of that. And I think for me, the realization that as leaders, we're actually, you know, servants to those we lead, for me was transformational. It changed the way I look at my role. You know, my job has to be making others successful, and then everything else will fall into place. And that's one of the things I also love about being a leader. You know, I have a tremendous passion for the outdoors as well. I remember as a very young person too, seeing HIOBS pamphlets, right? The Outward Bound pamphlets, and always wished I had a chance to do an adventure like that. And the funny thing was, it wasn't until I was in my 50s that I had a chance to do that and was able to do it, you know, as a vehicle for developing leaders on our teams. So a real interesting connection for me, you know, over time, as far as where I started and where we are today.
Thank you, Greg. You said something earlier in the discussion. I'll just touch on it for a second. You said, well, the things we need to do as leaders are simple. And it begs the question, well, what are those simple things we need to do as leaders, and how do we help others learn how to do those things?
Yeah, you want me to jump in on that now, or?
Sure, why not?
Look, there's so many. There's a long list, but you know, I'll just go to one that's one of my favorites, is walking the talk. You know, we as leaders set the tone, and I'm always telling our leaders, be careful of the shadow you cast. We can't espouse things that we don't live ourselves, right? We have to be the demonstration of our core values. And, you know, we have 3 core values at WGI: a passion for people, be the change you seek, and a commitment to excellence. Very simple. But be the change you seek is a great one, right? Because everybody has a chance to be a leader. You know, Jan's comment on encouraging people to step up. Well, that's what be the change you seek is about. But it's about providing that environment where they're comfortable doing it, right? We give people the opportunity to do it, give people the opportunity to fail, right? But to be what they want to be, to grow into what they want to grow into, to solve problems themselves without somebody in a leadership role or with a leadership title, you know, having to do it.
Thank you for taking the impromptu question here. Brittany, I'm going to come back to you for a moment. You know, knowing what you do for a living and what your academic background is, I'm guessing you are an evidence-based sort of person. So
Very much.
I'm curious to know what it is that either you need to create, or what it is that enables the programs that you're designing and delivering to deliver on their goals and to have the effect that you intend?
So when I first joined WEX, I was in my interview and I walked in and I looked around and I saw all those, those big poster things, right? And they were all over the walls of somebody's office. They had all these really amazing like leadership traits, and just like I could tell that they had come from a workshop. And I was like, wow, like this is the stuff that you guys talk about here. I have to be here. And so it's funny, I got like a little bit of a chuckle from somebody who ended up being one of my favorite people at WEX. And she didn't really say much about it, but we obviously talked about it afterward once I was on the team and everything. And one thing that came up is, the power of the programs that WEX has always offered. Quite frankly, they've changed a lot over the past few years, especially as you can imagine. But the struggle that I think every organization frankly has, to a differing degree perhaps, but is what happens. And I think it was Mike or Greg, I can't remember who, but somebody mentioned this earlier, but what happens once the program ends and they have to kind of go back to their day job, right? And so we did a fascinating job just creating this safe space. If you've ever heard of Migas Lodge on Sebago Lake, and I kind of forced Andrew and his team to do an Outward Bound experience there as well, because we used to bring our leaders together for a week at Migas, which is like the most serene place in Maine, which is saying a lot. We created this amazing environment where, we had, leaders of all levels sobbing, like crying. They were opening up, they were vulnerable, they were learning so much. It was just a really wonderful experience. And the community that we created through that is really phenomenal, and people still talk about it now, and it's been a few years since we've done that. So one thing that just kind of boggled my mind a little bit is like, oh man, why are these things still happening? Specific things that you can sort of look around as like, why is this policy in place, or why is this our hiring practice, or why is this a priority? Like, why can't we prioritize this instead? And so you find yourself still asking those questions, and it really feels like sometimes it's like, man, like everybody's investing this time into development, but what's the environment that they're then embedded in once this program is ended, right? So one thing that this year in particular, which is why I love this question, that we are focusing on is my role specifically. I'm partnering more. That's a word that I'm using a lot. I'm partnering with other areas of the organization, whether it's leaders out in the business, our diversity, equity, and inclusion team. We have a change management or change enablement team, that's standing up for the first time, because we are also, Greg, going through a transformation as well. So we have this really fabulous opportunity where I'm like, okay, we're doing these big things, like let me ask some questions, let me sit in, let me be part of this, so that we can consider the organization development lens. We can consider what are we asking from our leaders throughout this process. So it's really just being a part of those conversations in a way that, I haven't been before. Folks on my team are still doing a fabulous job, leading the programs, but I want to then advocate, at the senior most level to say, like, to influence the change that's happening around us, to make sure we're considering these really important practices.
Thank you. That's a very thoughtful response. It causes me to think of something Jan said earlier when she was talking about her leadership journey. You talked about the importance of creating a container where these results could be fostered, or behaviors or accomplishments or attributes could be nurtured. I wonder if we could segue to you for a second, Jan, and what is the magic? What's inside that container?
Thank you, Andrew. I think Brittany described quite a bit of it when she was going through her overview. But as I think about the container, it's not only about developing the individual, it's also about developing all the systems around that individual that allow them to be successful. So what does it look like to do a performance review in a system where you're not, being punitive, you're being thinking about it as a really developmental process? What are all the cues that managers give, leaders give for what they really expect from their employees? I've seen this happen a lot where people are, they're trying to do their best, they're trying to deliver, they think they're doing the right thing because that may be what they heard the last time they were in a conversation with their manager, but somehow or another they missed it. So what are the cues that we're giving people? How do we reinforce what we're really looking for as we think about good leadership? Is the organization to have all the policies in place that allow people to be who they are as they come to work and to be able to express that as well as to do their work? So it's all of that. It's policies, it's the way we treat each other every day. It is the way that we reward people, all of it. It's a lot to
as the two of you talk about that, and you both have this sort of systems oriented lens that you bring to the table, I simplify it for my sake to just, on the topic of how to develop these leadership development programs, that it's not enough to create the container just for the development program if that container doesn't authentically resemble the larger container of the organization and the organizational culture and processes and systems and so forth. And I'm thinking about that psychological safety topic as well. Am I in line with you here, or am I losing on that? Yeah.
The 100%. Yeah, if you don't have the safety to have the conversations that are hard, also to question each other's ideas, simply as that, and to take a little risk and try something new, then your company is going to stay at least stagnant, if not go backwards, right? And the real conversations that allow you to connect to one another won't happen without that safety.
And just to add to that, Andrew, one of the things that I worry most about in our leadership programs is what is the environment? I've created an environment. I've created a container for people over that length of their development process over a year, and they're going back to their organizations. And one of the questions they ask is, well, it doesn't quite look like this where I work. How do I make a change? What do I do? So that's one of my biggest concerns.
Thank you. Catherine, I'm going to reference something in the chat and bring it back to you for a moment. So earlier, when Mike posed the question, or at least proposed the conversation about leaders being born, Judy Ann Smith from the Hanley Center responded in both a comedic and an interesting way, I think. She wrote, "If leaders are born, the definition of when one is born is a great discussion. At birth, after taking on leadership responsibilities and learning through trainings and experiences, after parenting kids through adulthood, after becoming a Girl Scout." So I'm going to take that as a springboard for the moment. And by the way, for folks who don't know Judy Ann, her organization, the Hanley Center, also is in the business of creating incredible learning containers, but they're focused on the healthcare community in all of its meanings, predominantly in the Northeast, and I suppose predominantly in Maine, but not exclusively. And they do great work serving both administrative healthcare professionals and clinical healthcare professionals. Is really wonderful work. So, Catherine, coming back to you on this, when is the right time to unlock somebody's leadership potential, or give birth, if you will, to their leadership potential?
Well, that's kind of loaded, Andrew. I think that from my perspective, I think that when you see the potential, don't let that opportunity pass you by. I think that it's at a different place for different people for different reasons. And, in business, I think that as you see your recruiters and the people that they're talking with and bringing into your organization, those people have a lot of potential. I think you need to capitalize on that right away, as much as possible. Those opportunities, as they present themselves, will ultimately, if you capitalize on it, will ultimately create an employee who is a good team member, who is creative, who's going to stay with you, who's going to ride out some of the challenges that you have and be part of the solution. And I think that's really important. That the speed of which business is changing is incredibly fast and getting faster all the time. And if we have the right people who have those leadership skills, capabilities, we need to provide those opportunities, I think, so that our businesses will survive. It will change our culture. I think that, you know, on any given team, depending on what the task is or the challenge or the opportunity, you may have several leaders and they may change positions periodically depending on the challenge. Just like taking, you know, a bunch of adults out into the woods to, you know, find their way through. Somebody's going to have to read the compass. Somebody has to, you know, find the trail map. Somebody else is watching the weather. I mean, we all have a role to play, and periodically those roles change. And I think we need to embrace those things. And I think we need to capitalize on that. And it builds character, and it builds confidence. And if you have confidence, you're going to step forward in a really challenging time. And sometimes in those experiences, we fail. So let's fail fast, pick ourselves up, and move forward. And if we do it right, if we really see and embrace where people are, I think that will move our businesses forward. To Brittany's point, if we don't, we're going to fall behind. Somebody else is going to eat our lunch if we don't do this. So let's move forward.
That fail fast concept is really interesting. And a couple years back, I had a conversation with a woman at Smith College in Northampton, Mass, who runs a leadership development program for students out there. And she commented to me that, you know, the students who come to Smith are really high performing. They've been great achievers academically their whole lives. And one of the difficulties that comes with that high achievement is maybe a reluctance to say, I don't get it. I need some help over here, or can you explain it to me another way? Or, hey, I got this crazy wild idea. You might think it's ridiculous, but, and that she views her, you know, I think she said that the students call her like the dean of failure or something, because she's trying to make failure okay in her environment, you know.
I would suggest too, Andrew, that some of our greatest lessons learned come from failure.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely agree. And Andrew, I think there's one other thing that's important there too, which is, you know, the environment in which we're working and the challenges that get thrust upon us are always changing. And being a good leader in one situation, you may not have, you know, the right skills and traits to actually address a very, very different challenge or in a different time or with a different group, you know. So that's why I think as leaders too, we always have to be open to that development and growth and learning ourselves.
Yeah. And I want to speak to one thing Andrew said too about, you know, what you said about, you know, raising your hand and being that person. I think that goes back to what we were talking about in terms of the container. So, and the system, right? So if the system actually defines like a leader by being the person to ask a question and to, you know, and pushing back is okay, but even just asking a question purely, you know, just based in curiosity, like genuine curiosity about what if we did this, and it may be way like out of the blue, but I think if we do a better job of, and Greg, you know, you were talking about values, like having simple values, but then like operationalizing them, if you will, in a way that helps people understand, like this is a way in which we get to where we want to be, and this is one of our values, by asking those questions, and by being genuinely curious, even if you think the question is out of left field.
There are a couple other questions that got submitted in advance. And by the way, I'm sure there are other questions out there that I haven't gotten to, and I apologize if that's the case. So one is One is this, and I guess I'm going to twist the question a little bit. I'll tell you how it was written. It's how do I identify if you're a leader? How do you identify if you're a leader? My slight twist on that, since we came here in the context of discussing offering organizational development opportunities that help unleash that potential for other people. Many of you, perhaps all four of you, have part of your role is to help the organization identify the right people to participate in these programs, because you have seen that spark, like Catherine noted earlier. How do you do it?
I mean, personally, for me, it's a combination of things. So I do work specifically with emerging leaders as like a distinct category in our leadership development programs, which, by the way, wasn't a thing before 2 years ago. So I recognize this real propensity to promote people from within, which is fantastic. But I'm like, what are we doing to support them before they get promoted, right? And so that was the numbers I saw. I'm like, oh, percentage wise, like we're promoting a lot of people into team leader manager roles. Like this is great. But then, I did some research and realized that we had some work to do. Just, we were focusing so much on existing leaders, which is pretty typical. But, developing that program was, oh my gosh, such a win. And I think in putting people in the situations where they can lead, before or after that, the formal, development program, like our emerging leaders program, I get managers and directors, VPs who reach out and they're like, oh, I have this person who seems to have a lot of potential, but we're not sure. And so one of my responses is always, well, we have this emerging leaders program, but let's say like there's only a few months until our next cohort is run. For example, I always recommend, I ask them, we have our transformation work going on right now, which basically means that we have all these initiatives and work streams that are happening. I'm like, what can they do? How can they participate? Are they showing interest in a specific area and you might actually need support? Can you delegate something? Like, how can they demonstrate what you believe to be like a strong leader? I think putting people in the position to demonstrate their abilities, creating that safe space for them as a manager, as a leader, is really, really powerful. And it's a lower stakes situation too, where, or the manager can define the stakes, of course, but giving them the freedom to say, hey, try this out, let me know how I can support. But I think just putting people in the situations to lead.
Brittany, our executive director, Eric Denny, has often said to me, and I really like this when thinking about our professional programs, is that the organizations we work with, whether it's WEX or WGI or what have you, it's game day at your office every single day. Every day you walk in the building, it's game day. It's not practice day, it's game day. Yeah. And what we would like to provide is a practice field. How often does your team actually get to go out on a practice field that can mimic some of the behaviors or the feelings or the leadership moments, and yet do it in a way that from your business's point of view might be a learning opportunity, but inconsequential if you miss the kick or the swing, foul off the pitch or whatever analogy we want to imply here. So Jan, we're getting
Hey,
close.
Andrew?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Kim.
I was just going to say, we have a great question in chat that I'd love
Let's have it.
for the panelists to propose to them, because I think it's very timely. We have a question from Kathy Shannon at MDF, and she said, the speed of change feels like it creates a vicious circle where leaders are constantly working to adapt, support their teams to adapt and meet the moments, so they burn out, possibly leaving the organization, and the organization is left hiring new leaders who need to start the process all over again to keep the organization moving forward and alive. So her question is, for the panelists here, what is your advice? Like, how does your organization approach those situations and prevent that type of burnout and that circle from happening, that cycle?
Kim, thanks for bringing that forward. And Kathy, thanks for the question.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start because we're always worried about this. We have gotten to the point too, given the pace of business, the pace of change and the expectations that we do put on leaders sometimes, that we run the risk of burning people out all the time, especially too, if you get the right people who are really driven, they want to go full bore at it. And, but that's our job as leaders. If we're getting to that point too, where it's so frenetic and we know we're starting to burn people out, something's wrong. Right. And it could be the culture, the expectations we're setting, and sometimes expectations can be misunderstood, like, do it at any cost. And that's really not what the intent is. Sometimes it's very simple. It's about workload. Sometimes it's about the support teams. There's so many things that need to be considered in why we might be burning people out. And you really have to be focused on it, strip it down, and then fix the problems that would be driving that. It's easy too. I know we all get in this pull and this momentum. And as I tell our emerging leaders all the time, if you keep giving, a company has no soul, right? It's only the people in the company that have a soul. The company has no soul, and it will continue to take what you give it. You have to set your own boundaries as leaders as well, and ensure that you can do this for the long haul. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and you have to prepare yourself. You have to find those, the time in the day for yourself. You have to carve out, things about your spiritual health, your personal health, your physical health. And those are all things as leaders that we need to be training those emerging leaders too, so they don't get to a point of burnout.
The way we do things is starting to change. And it's because of the leadership opportunities that are available to the people in our organization. I think, if I think about some of the major projects that we've had over the years, we had this waterfall approach that would burn people out. And so our leaders are going as fast as they can, trying to do every single thing. And the speed of which we need to do it is really increasing. So as we change our methodologies and look at how we do things, and we do it in a more agile way, where we have short sprints that we accomplish something, people feel as though their contributions to the effort, whatever that is more rewarded. If it doesn't go perfectly, it's a short period of time. You can regroup and recalibrate and move forward. I think those are really important things to look at as we move into new ways to do work, because it is changing so quickly. And to your point, Greg, our company is our people. That's our culture. That's who we are. So we want to care for our people so that they stay committed to whatever the task at hand is. We want to be experts. We want to be partners. We want to be curious. We want to be conscientious. We want to be really transparent about what we're doing. And if we do those things well, our leaders will be able to move us forward.
Thank you.
I think the only
What?
thing, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I was just going to say, we've tried to be a little bit flexible in the moment here and pivoted on our plan. What I'd like to do right now is send you to small breakout rooms one more time. We'll keep it short, 6 minutes. We'll keep the breakout rooms a little bit smaller with people. And when you get back, we'll still have a little bit of time to chat. But what I'd like you to do when you meet up with these new crewmates, so to speak, in your room, is share maybe a golden nugget from this conversation that you think you don't want to forget, or that you can put into use or resonates in some way with work you're doing. And for that matter, if you happen to come up with a question that, boy, you really wish we'd gotten to today, we'd love to hear that too. And maybe you could either share it in the chat when you get back. And maybe, in fact, you could just anoint one person from your room to speak on your behalf. That would be great. And if we can get to them magically in the final 4 or 5 minutes we have, that would be incredible. And if we need to do a little bit of follow-up somehow in an email, that would be fun as well. So Nina, do you happen to have some small breakouts for a short time queued up for us?
Yep. 1 second. Just stand by. All right, all set. Sending now.
Thanks, Nina. Mike Burles was just noting how much he's been enjoying reading the chat comments, and both insightful and entertaining. And so I hope that you've been availing yourselves of that as well. So we promised to land this boat on the dock at the anointed time, which was 11:30 Eastern time. That's only 3 and some percentage of a minute left. Is there somebody out there who might actually just raise a hand, or for that matter, come off mute and force their way into the conversation and give us that final go away question? And if you're not that person, maybe share yours in the chat so that we know what it was. I know that somebody is gathering the courage right now, and just so that I don't say it before, don't forget before you leave, I am so grateful, number one, for all of you attendees coming today. But Mike, thanks for getting us started today, and Catherine and Brittany and Greg and Jan for being here and being so generous with your time. All right, who's got that question? I gave you plenty of time to muster up.
I don't know if it was a question that came out of our group, but something that we were digging into deeply was the concept of this learning container space, where we'd either take people on our team, for us in athletics, or us as leaders of a department of business, or us as Outward Bound professionals taking youngsters. And we have this learning leadership container, and we put people in that. And we teach them leadership skills, and we challenge them, and we move them outside their comfort zone, and they learn more who they are, both physical and emotional. And then it seems like it's so repetitive in our culture that we take them out of those experiences and then we re-enter them back in. So as whether a professional who comes in and takes an Outward Bound course or goes to a leadership thing, and then they go back into their working environment, that can they bring that leadership? Can they bring that back? And what happens is, for the most part, it's very difficult, because do we teach them to recognize that even though they're going back into a physical space, they don't have to go back into a physical mindset? And that's really, really important to understand. So how do we, as leaders, not just create learning containers with a big neon sign that says learn leadership here, right? Come here, learn leadership. Instead, how do we learn to weave leadership into our culture, the invisible tapestry that is? So I think that that's a really big thing, as we kind of digest, and maybe it was more me in the group who brought up the concept of how do you make leadership a part of your tapestry, more than just make it a container space that you go and then remove.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just say quickly, when I think about container, I think about the learning container. I also think about the employee container, in which we as leaders in our organizations, what we have to build every day for people to succeed. So that's when I think container, I think about that whole package, so to speak. What are the policies we put in place? How do we work with people day to day? How do we work with leaders to work with their people every day? So all of those pieces are important.
Yeah, I think the word culture that I keep coming back to too, because to me, it's inclusive of all of those things. And our job as leaders is to create that culture that allows it to continue to happen, and all those other elements that are so important for people to continue to develop.
So it's 11:30. You might not have noticed, but we're tied at the dock here. If you need to disembark, grab your bags, and you're welcome to do that. If you'd like to linger a little bit, I'm happy to linger a little bit. So I'll do that. And of course, for our guests and panelists, you may have something urgent pressing right at this moment, so don't feel at all obligated to stay aboard. But thank you again for being here. And we'll do something similar to this in the not so distant future.